I was equally excited to revisit DMC Devil May Cry as I was DMC4, which I covered in the previous video. When I played DMC for the first and last time, it was the most recent game in the franchise, originally dropping for the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and PC in early 2013. But now, we live in a post-Devil May Cry 5 world. I'm excited to revisit DMC Devil May Cry because the damage fans thought it would do to the franchise is now irrelevant, and you can just play the game and see what it has to offer on its own terms, which is what we're here for today. If you're a Devil May Cry fan or just someone who followed gaming discourse in the early 2010s, you're no doubt familiar with this attempted reboot of the Devil May Cry franchise. The brief recap is that Devil May Cry 4, which came out on PS3 and 360 in 2008, was an attempt to bring in a larger audience to the DMC franchise than it had before. The game was a success, however, it wasn't what Capcom hoped for, so their fix was to look for external talent to see what they could bring to the series in an attempt to gain a larger audience. British studio Ninja Theory developed the reboot, the studio behind the PS3 game Heavenly Sword. The reboot's initial teaser upset people because it was seemingly following the late 2000s, early 2010s trend of making it as edgy as you could get away with on a T rating. Around this time, the culture was getting kind of sick of this sort of thing. People were mad, not just because fans tend to get angry when you change their favorite IPs and do insane shit like send death threats, but also because the series wasn't really in a position where a reboot was a natural choice. Looking at DMC4, it had an open ending with more stories to tell for Nero and Dante. It also left a lot of room for improvement in the gameplay department. DMC4 is one of the most mechanically complex action games ever made, and the issue is that the gameplay was tied down to a kind of mediocre campaign. The potential for improvement was palpable. But Capcom was going in the direction of a straight-up reboot. New Dante, new gameplay, new everything. It was also seemingly going in the generic, serious, edgy direction, too. It just didn't instill a lot of excitement in the audience. I'm someone who's fine with completely new takes on old things, but it's also hard to get behind when the devs gave a talk at GDC about how DMC4 Dante wouldn't look out of place in Brokeback Mountain compared to their version of the character. There are so many homophobic problems with that assessment, as well as saying Dante isn't Batman Forever, a film made by Joel Schumacher, a director who was gay. Though, when watching the footage, it seems like what he's talking about is how the art team for this game didn't think the flashy colors and bombastic antics was Dante, but rather at his core was a human with incredible powers. I think Dante is both, but regardless, their point was explained in perhaps the most tasteless way imaginable. Again, it's hard to get fans on your side when you're saying that this new version trounces the old one because of how lame it was.
Not in a million years.
But that's just a brief outline of the controversy surrounding DMC before it came out. The game was announced in 2010 and wasn't released until 2013. But I'm not here to talk about how mad people were about the game when it came out. The YouTuber FoxK did a pretty definitive history on the game's development that I recommend checking out if you're interested in it. Speaking for myself, I didn't play it until 2019 when I gave it a scathing review. I haven't really played it much at all since then, so because I'm both less likely to get into a hate hype wave than I was back then, and also because we now have DMC5, I thought it would be really interesting to play DMC Devil May Cry again, free of all the drama. So in this game, the story is divorced from any of the events of the previous Devil May Cry games. It's a whole new story, and a new take on the backstory of Dante and Virgil. The game takes place in Limbo City, a major metropolitan area where Dante kills demons and gets laid, but little else. Demons rule the earth in this world. Mundus, the king of the underworld, is a corporate CEO who controls the media and food and drink and nearly every aspect of life. The demonic hordes live in a parallel world called Limbo. Mundus sends demons to kill Dante because he's the only known living son of Sparta, a demon warrior who fought alongside Mundus until he fell in love with an angel named Eva. Their union was sacrilege, and Eva was killed and Sparta was banished. A Nephilim, a half-demon, half-angel, is the only being capable of defeating Mundus. And that's where we find Dante at the start of the story, a drifter living in a trailer, until a human medium called Cat finds Dante and brings him into the Order, a terrorist rebellion against Mundus led by Virgil, Dante's brother. The three of them work on various operations to take down Mundus' empire and avenge their parents, which is all you need to know to get into the game. Even once you ignore the radically different tone and story from the earlier games, the original release of this game had a lot working against it. On console, the game was 30 FPS, which is becoming more and more standard throughout the 360 era. DMC4 had a pretty stable 60 FPS on 360, so that was a downgrade in playability. And then, the game and combat system made choices that further dragged the experience down for many. But if you're playing DMC in the modern age, you don't really have to worry about this anymore. For the video, I played on my copy of DMC Definitive Edition, a remaster that was released on the PS4 and Xbox One. It even had a physical copy, which is on the screen right now. I only bring that up because for some reason DMC 4 Special Edition got a physical release in Japan, but not America. But I suppose the consolation prize is that in all regions, DMC 4 Special Edition came out on PC, when the Definitive Edition remaster of the reboot did not. But anyway, the remaster of DMC sports a lot of improvements to the gameplay. To just list a few of them, it has full 60 FPS gameplay, which makes it easier to react to the enemies and do more complex combos because the gameplay is smoother. You get Turbo Mode, which ups the game speed to 120%, making it even faster and more cathartic. You get the option to switch between the original game's targeting system and the target lock system the older games used. There's new skins, new difficulty modes, an extra cutscene was added for additional story context, and a bunch of balance updates to the mechanics for Dante, Virgil, and the enemies. And it makes completion more streamlined too. In the original game, there would be these secret keys with different materials that open different doors to secret missions. Certain keys that only work on certain doors. In the remaster, all keys and doors are the same, and any key you collect can be used on any door. Simple stuff like that goes a long way in making the game better paced. You can find the full list of changes between DMC 2013 and the Definitive Edition in the description because it was posted on the Devil May Cry forum. If you haven't played this game, definitely get it on the remaster, and if you only played the original version, I think it's worth a second playthrough on the newer version as well, because it has a lot to offer in terms of balance tweaks. I think the combat in DMC is really satisfying. Dante is nowhere near as complex as he was in DMC 3 and 4, but that wasn't the goal. The game is just really cathartic to play. You get access to 5 melee weapons, and each one just packs a wallop, and that makes fighting fun to do when you tear through demons. The presentation of the combat is very well done. The game dropped the fixed camera angles in favor of a more traditional third-person camera, but that doesn't stop the battles from feeling cinematic. I really like what they did with the style meter in this game. The last two games had the stylish ranking with a meter underneath it showing how much was left till your next grade and how close it was to diminishing as well. But in this game, they just made the stylish ranking and the meter one and the same, and when the announcer shouts out what rank you get, it ups the hype factor of the game considerably. I bring this up because I thought it was slick when DMC 5 did that, but in hindsight that was something that the main series brought over from DMC. I just think part of a sick action game is great presentation, and DMC definitely carries its own weight in that category. I also like how getting upgrades for weapons was simplified. Killing enemies gives you upgrade points, and when the bar is full you get 1 upgrade point. Each upgrade for every weapon costs just 1 upgrade point. Most of the weapons only get a couple of combos, but then you can further enhance the power of these combos as the game goes on. You can have every combo unlocked somewhat quickly though, which I thought was great because the real depth in this game comes from mixing them together. You start the adventure with Rebellion, which has a couple of basic combos and classic maneuvers like the Stinger, the Trillion Stab, High Time, and the Helmbreaker. And you can unlock core abilities like Enemy Step for classic DMC jump cancelling action. In Mission 2, you'll unlock the Angel and Demon Whips, which really change the combat. By holding down R2, you'll activate the demon weapons. While in demon mode, Square will use the whip to pull objects towards you, including enemies. Holding L2 activates angel weapons. The angel whip pulls Dante towards objects. In platforming, this is put to good use throughout the game. DMC is the first game in the series to have good platforming control. All 4 of the previous games handled kind of like ass when you were forced to jump around, which wasn't that common, but whenever it came up it always sucked because the jumps were so stiff and you were always committed to that jump you made, and the double jump only barely helped course correct. In DMC, jumping and double jumping feels more natural and easier to control, and you get this angel dash maneuver that gives you great distance too. While jumping around, you need to use the angel whip to swing to and from, and then the demon whip to pull platforms around. It's not mind-blowing, but it is quality platforming in a Devil May Cry game that's absolutely worthy of praise. In combat, the whips are unique because you might be doing an air combo and kill the enemy, but pulling another enemy up to you to keep the air combo going is easy with the demon whip. If your attack sends the enemies far away, the angel whip can be used to close the gap. It's much easier to maintain a consistent air game in DMC than it was in any of the previous games, but I don't think that's a flaw. I just think by design that the air game is more accessible, and with sound design and combos like this, I can't complain because I had fun with it. You unlock 2 angel weapons and 2 demon weapons throughout the campaign. Your demon weapons are the heavy-hitting, slow options, and the angel weapons are the fast, rapid-fire attacks that deal less damage. The Arbiter is a powerful axe that sends smaller enemies flying and deals a great amount of damage. The Eryx is one of the slower barehanded weapons in series history, but it works really well in the game since the attacks are, once again, so devastating to hit enemies with. On the angelic side, The Osiris is a scythe that cuts through enemies really fast and can pull them in any which way. And the Aguila is a sharp disc weapon you toss to either send enemies flying away or pulling them all in close for another attack. As I mentioned before, each weapon doesn't have a ton of combos, but the combos they do have come with many of the same inputs. Like Rebellion has a combo for pressing triangle twice, and then a pause, and then continuing to press triangle. But so do Arbiter and Osiris. DMC becomes super satisfying to chain combos together in because, let's say you're destroying an enemy's shield with Arbiter and do it after 2 hits. Then you let go of R2 and you're back to using Rebellion and the combo just continues. You don't have to start the attack combo over again when switching weapons like previous games, you just keep going. The loading screen shows off how much you can do with this combat system when playing at a high level. It's really good because the systems in DMC are really easy to get into, but also have a lot of depth for the hardcore fans to sink their teeth into because the variety of combos feels pretty endless with how the game handles weapon switching, and the utility the game gets out of the Angel and Demon whips in combat is great too. The Definitive Edition also rebalancing things for the better in this area. In the original, red and blue enemies could only be damaged with Demon and Angel weapons respectively. There are still some of those in DE, but not to a degree where it kills the combo game. Some enemies will be weak to a certain weapon class, but not invulnerable to others. While making the video, I got really into DMC's combat, from the visuals and sound design to the creativity that emerges from the game's combo system to the doable and interesting secret missions. I just thought this game was really fun to play around with. It's not perfect or my favorite game in the series or anything, but for what it's worth, I think this game's remaster really brings out the best in this game and makes it a really fun game to play when you get into it. Muscle memory from other DMC games always makes getting back into this one a little weird, but I think it's well worth playing. The only thing I had against the combat was that the firearms are too slow to be useful a lot of the time. There's often too much wind up and cooldown for the shotgun, for example, so I didn't use it as much as I did in other games. But otherwise, I thought the combat was pretty strong. The only gameplay issue I could bring up with the campaign is that I noticed that the story mode was kind of inconsistent in length. Some missions will be kind of short, where you'll fight some enemy waves and the mission will be over, and then others are much longer. Like it took me almost 20 minutes to beat Mission 2 when I first played it for the video. And that's because some of the more story-heavy missions pump up the dialogue and extended scenes of running forward while listening to characters talk. And look, I'm a big fan of Uncharted and The Last of Us and games like that, but in games like those, I usually replay them to get the full story experience. In a game like DMC, the replay value comes from going back and perfecting your combat skills and exploring for items you missed. It can kinda kill the replay value for something like Mission 5, where it just begins with a long scene like this. But I didn't think this was a game breaker, just something I noticed. What makes story sequences noticeable in this game is that the writing isn't great here. That's another thing people really hated about the game when it came out, and that has not gotten better with time. I think the issues start with Dante. His arc is pretty much a carbon copy of the story arc in DMC 3, I just think the execution is much worse. In both games, Dante starts the story a bit aimless, not really doing anything with his demonic heritage, but he gets involved with a mission that forces him to confront his past and accept his role as humanity's protector from the demonic hordes, motivated by a woman he meets who's willing to fight tooth and nail to get what they want, even if they don't have a fraction of the power that Dante has. But then, Dante in DMC 3 is a likable character at all points in the story. This version of Dante just tries too hard to have an attitude, and it just comes off really annoying. Like, he's that guy who needs to undercut people being sincere with snarky remarks that aren't funny. Snarkiness has been a core component of Dante since DMC 1, however the old version was just more entertaining with it. I also think that the line reads for Dante are really bad in this game. The delivery is part of selling a witty comeback, and a lot of the time it just sounds like Dante himself isn't convinced by anything he's saying.
Hey Bob, put a spin on this.
In cutscenes, he's hit or miss, but in the in-game dialogue, I think it was really poorly directed because he says almost none of his quips with the inflection needed to sell it. I don't think it's impossible for some of these lines to work, but a lot of the time he just sounds bored, like he doesn't know what he's saying.
Get lost. Yeah, whatever. Who invited you, fat ass? So which one of you fat asses wants to be Limo's biggest loser? You've been eliminated. Congratulations. You win.
That looked pretty nasty.
That? Nah, that was just a big fat joke. Why am I doing this for a crusty old demon? Oh yeah, that's why.
I wouldn't be surprised if much of the in-game dialogue was just read in a booth without a lot of context. Or maybe the voice of Dante in this game was just more natural acting on the mocap stage than he was in the recording booth. But there are a lot of examples of bad lines in this that are punctuated by bad line reads.
Killing your child like that? Watching it explode into little wet chunks? Hearing you scream like one of your little demon bitches? Priceless.
The plot itself is just not as clever as it thinks it is. The game making demons essentially a ruling class that serve up hot garbage for the humans to consume is interesting, and I really like the idea of Limbo. The demon world just being a mirror of the human world is great. It makes for a cool contrast, as most of the game is played in Limbo, where the colors are super saturated and the laws of physics are much different than the real world while you fight demons. But then you get pulled back into the real world and it's this gray and drab wasteland. But in execution, not much is done with the theme of demons controlling society beneath the surface. Bob Barbas is this Fox News type anchor complaining about the acts of Dante and the Order. It's a very one-note gag, and once you find out that Bob is a demon controlled by Mundus propagandizing the populace, that's pretty much it. He keeps going on until you finally stop him like 10 missions in. I don't think this story is really giving you anything that feels all that fresh or original, which is fine. No story has to break the bank to say what has never been said before. But as I also stated, I don't think the main character's arc in this is that compelling because he's not very likable. The game has this societal commentary, but then it undermines itself with really try-hard vulgarity. It's not like I'm anti-swearing in a rated M game or anything, it's just not clever much of the time. See the already played demon bitches line. But the perfect example is how Mundus uses a succubus to produce the formula for the energy drink that keeps humans fat and lazy. But I'm not going to remember that part because of whatever it was the writers may have been trying to say about energy drinks and the companies who make them. I'm going to remember the fuck you competition between Dante and the succubus.
So you must be the secret ingredient. I'm your prom date, you ugly sack of shit. Yeah, but you can call me Dante the Demon Killer. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think?
You want to kill me? You can't kill me. I'm 1,200 years old.
You don't look a day over 12,000.
Fuck you.
Fuck you.
Fuck you.
Honestly, in this game's attempts to have such witty dialogue like that, it's so lame that it circles back around to being really fucking funny. I said earlier that by the end of the game, I started to really get into it. Like, I didn't want to put the controller down in my second and third sessions with it, but it was not because of the story, that's for sure. The gameplay was just getting better with each mission, but the writing really started to drag its heels in the last few missions. Cat gets captured by Mundus and need to go to the nightclub to capture his mistress who's pregnant with his child. Dante and Mundus trade hostages here. But Virgil decides to just shoot the mistress and the unborn baby anyway to provoke Mundus's anger, which leads to the final set of levels where the heroes fight through Mundus's tower to finish him off. But then, that's another thing about the story that doesn't work. Virgil. Mundus is a hands-off villain. Dante doesn't even meet him until the final boss. That's fine. Mundus in DMC1 was very much the same. However, the rivalry between Dante and Mundus got built up more and more as you saw through dialogue what kind of person Dante really was and how twisted and evil Mundus was. It worked well for what it was. But since DMC is copying the arc from DMC3, the dynamic between Dante and Virgil is a critical thing that game had that this one is missing. Arkham was the main antagonist of Devil May Cry 3, but Dante's rivalry with Virgil carried the story. I think this game's take on Virgil is one of the story's biggest misfires. Dante's growth here is just because he likes Cat, which makes enough sense, it just feels really rushed, and not enough for this cynical snark to change in the span of a couple days. When DMC3 had both Dante's contrast to Lady, but also Virgil. The first two missions of DMC3 setting up how cool Dante was, but then Virgil rises hundreds of feet into the air on the tower, looking down at you. And then the tough boss you just beat flies up to Virgil, who kills it without even looking at it. Dante might be cool, but that guy is the real deal. Dante's growth as a character is measured by how he fares against Virgil. Virgil is the only character who can keep up with Dante's wit and just beats him in a fight 7 missions in. In DMC, Dante basically had his memory wiped, so he more or less meets Virgil for the first time in the story. Then, Virgil is your ally for most of the game. He and Dante clearly have ideological differences in the value that Cat brings to the organization, but since Virgil isn't a villain, he's not leaving much of an impact on the story until the hostage trade. That's the first sign Virgil's up to no good, but by this point, Dante has already transformed from a drifter into a fighter for good anyway. This Virgil is cemented as a bad guy in the finale because after the brothers defeat Mundus, Virgil just announces how he can finally take over the world and the others are like, bro, what? As if Virgil's world-dominating plans were just nowhere to be found before. It comes out of nowhere and starts the final boss, but as I said, this plot lacks the real build-up to that final battle that DMC3 had. In fact, the story does the opposite of what DMC3 did. Not only because the brothers were aligned for most of the story, but because the plot repeatedly establishes that Dante is the stronger one. The original continuity makes Dante the underdog by making Virgil way more powerful than him. In this version, as kids, Dante was stronger, and in the story, Dante is the one who does all the fighting while Virgil hacks computers and does underhanded stuff like leaving his allies to die and blasting the mistress. Having an underhanded villain who doesn't do his own dirty work can be a good story, but this one just sets up Virgil as a less than threatening figure from the offset. I mean, when Dante says he's stronger, Virgil doesn't even disagree.
I'm stronger. I'm smarter. I'm better looking. And I got a bigger dick.
So I don't feel any tension when the final fight starts. Dante is the strong one and Virgil's just a weird freak. The final boss doesn't help either. I still get my butt kicked when fighting the Virgil battles in DMC3 because they were legitimately tough. This final boss is super easy on normal mode. I don't think I ever drop below half health because Virgil's attacks are really easy to dodge and don't do much damage. So it made his defeat and retreat feel pretty inevitable. The game got a DLC campaign called Virgil's Downfall that takes place after his defeat where he opened up a portal and walked away, but then, ignoring this game getting no sequel, a story about this Virgil gaining more powers and wanting to kill Dante isn't that compelling of a story because this Virgil had his chance to make an impact as a villain in the main story, and it paled in comparison to the original. The gameplay of Virgil's Downfall is fun, with good platforming challenges and satisfying fast-paced combat encounters, but the story is just not doing it for me. Which really sums up the game pretty well. DMC Devil May Cry is a game I've really come to see in a different light than I used to. The last few minutes rattled off a bunch of things I didn't like about the story and how it bogs down the game, but I think when you look past that, there's a really solid game in here. After I completed my playthrough, I kept coming back to the game, looking for secret keys and lost souls and trying to get all the collectible health crosses. Trying to see what all the levels had to offer and getting better ranks was a process I enjoyed, especially since I was skipping cutscenes. When I really dug into it, it's not a game that felt hastily put together or like a work-for-hire project. I think DMC is a game that has a lot to offer. The Definitive Edition allows us to see the game in the best possible light since it fixes so many things to make the game far more enjoyable. It is definitely the best re-release the series ever did since it made a long list of improvements to the experience. Conceptually speaking, I think DMC didn't really work. The story is conflicted between its really serious, edgy parts and its goofy, juvenile dialogue, but beyond that, I think this is a really fast-paced and fluid action game that can be a lot of fun to play. It's not a game I'd say you need to drop everything to play, but it's fun. The silly thing is, I played the remaster for my video on it 5 years ago, and could have gotten just as into it then as I did for this video, but back then, I wanted to dislike DMC, so therefore I found every reason to do so. That's just a difference in how I operated way back then versus now. I don't feel like I've got anything to prove and will just say what I thought, and I thought this game was fun. To be fair to my past self though, I think this game is easier to appreciate in a bubble than it was before. As I said at the start of the video, DMC was this radical departure from the main series, and at the time it seemed like Capcom was trying to outright replace the OG series with this. And since DMC4 was the way that it was, with no sequel in sight, fan animosity towards DMC Devil May Cry somewhat made sense. Especially since the series then went 6 years without another game. And it's very cursed to think almost that amount of time has passed since DMC 5, but yeah. Devil May Cry 5 now exists and is everything I could have wanted it to be and then some. So DMC Devil May Cry doesn't really matter as much. It's easy to just pop in the remaster and enjoy all there is to enjoy from it as an action game and leave it at that, seeing it as a failed experiment of what Capcom tried to do when they wanted to branch the series out. But it was still an otherwise fine game despite some of its conceptual misfires. And I think that's a good note to leave the game on. But now, to close this DMC Saga revisit, I'm going to be playing Devil May Cry 5 Special Edition, and I'm very excited to get back into that game and really share just how much I enjoyed DMC 5 with you guys in the next video. So I hope everyone looks forward to that, because in the meantime, I'll close the video by saying what I always do. If you made it this far into the video, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.